Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a massive concept for your Criminal Law 1 class: how constitutional rights literally build a wall around the state's power to punish. We're zeroing in on Module 1, specifically the constitutional limitations on criminal law. We'll be looking directly at the freedom of expression under Article 3, Section 4 of the 1987 Constitution. And to really ground this theory, we're going to unpack the landmark case of Guingguing versus People. Let's get right into it. The Supreme Court's full-text decision actually kicks off with this really powerful quote from Benjamin Franklin: "Whoever would overthrow the liberty of a nation must begin by subduing the freeness of speech." It perfectly sets the stakes here, doesn't it? The court is essentially telling us that free expression isn't just some nice-to-have privilege. It is the absolute bedrock of a modern democratic state. Without it, the liberty of the entire nation is at risk. So here's our game plan for this explainer. We'll map this out using the classic FRAC model. We're going to cover the constitutional limits, break down the facts of the case, hit the issue and ruling, pull out those key legal doctrines. And then we'll wrap up with some rapid-fire recitation prep and an exam memory guide so you are fully prepared for class. All right, let's start with those constitutional limits on criminal law. Before we even think about criminal liability, we have got to look at Article 3, Section 4 of the Bill of Rights. It strictly prohibits laws that abridge the freedom of speech, expression, or the press. Now, you already know the state has police power, right? It has the authority to define and punish crimes. But here is the catch. That power is absolutely not absolute. Any government move that restricts speech automatically faces a very heavy presumption of being unconstitutional. And this sets up an epic clash of rights at the very heart of this module. On one side, you have the state's police power to punish things like criminal libel, which is basically the state trying to protect people's reputations. But on the other side, you have a citizen's fundamental liberty to express themselves freely. So what happens when applying a penal law directly steps on someone's constitutional right to speak about a matter of public concern? Well, that is the exact tension the Supreme Court had to resolve. Which brings us to the facts of Guingguing versus People. Let's see how this clash played out in the real world. Okay, here's what went down. We have Circe Choi Turalba, who is a very prominent public affairs radio host in Cebu. Then we have Suriako Boy Guingguing and Segundo Lim. These two published a one-page paid advertisement in a Sunday newspaper. But here's the crucial detail. They didn't just invent rumors. Their ad literally just reproduced existing true public records and photographs of criminal cases involving Turalba. Well, Turalba didn't like that one bit, so he sued for libel. The regional trial court actually convicted Guingguing and Lim, and the Court of Appeals backed him up. So Guingguing elevated it to the Supreme Court, basically arguing, hey, Turalba is a public figure, and we just publish public records. Now let's crack open the legal mechanics: the issue, the ruling, and the ratio. Imagine you're standing in class and your professor points at you and asks for the issue. You need to hit two core things. First, whether or not Turalba is a public figure. And second, whether or not the conviction for criminal libel can stand without proof of actual malice. If Turalba is indeed a public figure, the whole standard for a criminal libel conviction changes dramatically. So what did the Supreme Court do? They ruled in favor of the accused. They granted the petition, reversed the lower courts, and fully acquitted Guingguing. The court essentially said the prosecution completely failed to overcome the massive constitutional protections afforded to free expression. But you know law school, just knowing who won won't cut it. We need the why. Let's look at the ratio decidendi. First up, why did they say Turalba was a public figure? This is fascinating because the court expands the definition way beyond just elected government officials. They said, look, he's a public affairs radio host. He actively jumps into public controversies, he's got pervasive notoriety in the community, and he voluntarily thrust himself into the public eye to influence issues. By doing all of that, he made himself a public figure, which means he opened himself up to public scrutiny. And because he's a public figure, the constitutional standard kicks in. The state had to prove actual malice. And they totally failed to meet that high burden. Why? Because the published ad relied on existing criminal cases. It used public records. It wasn't some fabricated lie. It was the actual truth. The court made it super clear. Speech about public figures gets heightened protection. And that's to guarantee that our public debate remains uninhibited, robust, and wide open. All right, let's isolate the specific legal doctrines you need to lock into your vocabulary. The biggest one is actual malice. This is the famous New York Times versus Sullivan standard that we've adopted into Philippine jurisprudence. It means you made a statement either knowing it was completely false or with a reckless disregard for whether it was false or not. The main takeaway? Honest mistakes or sharp criticisms about public figures are protected. You're only going to be liable if you knew you were lying or just didn't care about the truth at all. Now compare that constitutional standard to Article 354 of the Revised Penal Code. Normally, the law presumes malice in any defamatory imputation. But we have the fair comment doctrine. This acts as a vital shield for comments on matters of public interest. It's a judicial extension that says criticisms of public figures or government officials are qualifiedly privileged. When this doctrine applies, that automatic presumption of malice is destroyed. Poof, gone. The burden then shifts right back to the prosecution to explicitly prove actual malice. Okay, time to put you in the hot seat. Let's do some rapid-fire recitation prep. Picture your professor leaning over the podium and asking, "Counsel, explain to the class why a purely criminal law topic is being severely limited by a constitutional law principle in this specific case." You need a sharp, confident response here. You've got to remember that no branch of law exists in a vacuum. Criminal law defines the crime, sure, but the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, and it always gets the final word. You've got to memorize the core logic bridging these concepts. Who's a public figure? Anyone with pervasive fame or who jumps into a public controversy. What's actual malice? Knowing a statement is false or acting with reckless disregard of its truth. Why does this matter in Crim Law 1? Because you cannot apply penal statutes like criminal libel without observing constitutional free expression standards. And what about truth as a defense? Yes, the Supreme Court explicitly said that if a statement about a public figure is true, it falls under the justifiable motive of free expression. That literally flips the standard criminal law presumption on its head to protect free speech. Finally, let's lock in your exam memory guide so you are completely ready for midterms. Lock in this distilled FARAC checklist for your essay outlines. If you get an exam hypothetical where a blogger, a journalist, or just a regular citizen criticizes a famous person or politician, run this checklist in your head. Is it a public figure? Yes. Was actual malice proven? No. Boom. Article 3, Section 4 protects the speech, and there is absolutely no criminal liability. The state's police power is restricted by the Constitution. I'll leave you with this provocative thought. If the state's power to punish were absolute, then who really protects the truth when a public figure is involved? Keep that question in mind as you power through your remaining criminal law modules. Think about exactly where we draw the line between protecting a person's reputation and safeguarding our democracy. Guingguing versus People proves the power to punish is not a blank check. It stops right where your freedom of expression begins. Keep analyzing, keep questioning, and good luck with your recitations.